She was the only nurse on the entire floor brave enough to walk into his room, and she was the only one who noticed that someone was quietly, carefully hurting him. Naomi Adeyemi didn't gasp, didn't freeze, didn't let her hands shake the way her heart was shaking. That was the first thing they teach you on the night shift at a hospital like Hartwell, the private medical center on Manhattan's Upper East Side, where the city's most dangerous and most untouchable people came to be sick in secret. You learn to keep your face calm while your mind is already running for the exits. She checked the monitor, smoothed his blanket, walked out like nothing was wrong. Then, she went straight to the supply room, leaned against the cold metal shelves, and made herself look at what she'd just seen one more time. Now, before we go any further, if you've ever noticed something nobody else noticed, something that put a stranger's life in your hands, and felt that terrible weight of, do I get involved or do I protect myself, then this story is going to reach somewhere deep in you. Stay with me. Because what Naomi did in the next 20 minutes burned her old life to the ground and built her a new one she never in 1,000 years would have dreamed of, and she had no idea any of it was coming. Drop a comment right now and tell me, would you have walked back into that room? Hold on to your answer. By the time we're done here, you might learn something about yourself you didn't expect. Room 1907 was the last door at the end of the private wing. Behind two men in dark suits who never sat down and never spoke and watched everyone who passed like the hallway was a threat that hadn't shown its face yet. Inside lay a patient admitted under a false name, a man the whole floor whispered about and nobody wanted to be assigned to. The chart on the door said cardiac complications, stable, recovering. The man in the bed told a different story, and Naomi was the only person who had bothered to read it. 4 years she'd worked the night shift at Hartwell. 4 years of holding the hands of strangers at 3 a.m, of being the last face frightened people saw before surgery and the first face they saw when they woke. Of clocking out at dawn and taking the train back to a small apartment in the Bronx where her 16-year-old brother Caleb was usually asleep over his homework at the kitchen table. Their mother had passed 2 winters ago, and she had left behind 2 things: a son who still flinched at loud doors and a stack of debt with Naomi's name penciled in beside her own. So Naomi worked nights, smiled at people who frightened her, and never ever gave anyone a reason to take this job away from her. She had a brother to raise. She could not afford to be brave. But there are some things a good nurse cannot unsee. The man in 1907 was Do Hyun-woo. Korean, somewhere in his early 40s. And even flat on his back with tubes in his arm, he carried the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from control. The stillness of a man who has spent his whole life deciding who lives well and who doesn't. Out in the world, he was the head of one of the largest family empires in Asia, a name spoken carefully, a man with as many enemies as he had floors in his buildings. Here he was just a body the staff hurried past. The 2 suited men at the door, his people, never left. And the rest of the hospital had decided, quietly and unanimously, that whatever happened in that room was not their business. Naomi noticed him the very first night they assigned her his vitals, because he was the only patient on the floor who never once asked her for anything. He didn't ring the call button, he didn't complain. He watched the ceiling with the patience of a man waiting out a sentence, and when she'd said, softly, "I'm going to check your line now, mister," and stopped, not knowing what name to use, he had turned his head and looked at her like she was the first real thing he'd seen in a week. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he'd said, in careful English. And she had answered, without thinking, "I'm not. You look like you could use someone who isn't." Something had moved behind his eyes then. Neither of them had mentioned it. So she was the one who noticed. His chart said he was recovering. But every night for a week his numbers had been quietly, steadily getting worse. In a pattern that didn't match a heart that was healing, it matched a body being slowly worn down from the inside. The medication hanging in his line tonight did not match what the chart said had been ordered, and the consultant who had flown in 3 days ago at the family's request, a smooth man named Dr. Ferris, who signed off on every change himself and dismissed every nurse before she could ask a question, had been the only person allowed to touch that line. Naomi stood in the supply room with her heart going like a fist on a door, and understood. with the cold clarity of someone who has spent 4 years learning the difference between a body fighting an illness and a body losing a fight that had been rigged, exactly what she was looking at. Somebody was hurting Do Hyun-woo, slowly, in a private room, behind his own guards, and they were almost finished. Do Hyun, she could feel the shape of the decision sitting on her chest. If she was wrong, if she walked up to a billionaire's hand-picked specialist and a floor full of administrators and accused him of murder over a discrepancy on a chart, she would be finished. No license. No job. No way to keep the lights on in the Bronx. No way to keep Caleb in the school that had finally started to feel like home for him. She would be throwing away the only thing standing between her brother and everything she'd promised their mother she would never let happen. And if she was right, and she said nothing, a man would be dead by morning, and she would have watched it happen with her hands in her pockets. She thought about her mother, about the last good night of her life. When Naomi had sat at the edge of a bed, not so different from 1907, and held a hand that had cleaned other people's houses for 20 years so her daughter wouldn't have to, and her mother had said, in a voice already going thin, "Promise me you'll always be the person who does the right thing even when it's expensive. Promise me, Naomi. The cheap thing is everywhere. Be the other thing," she had promised. She straightened her scrubs, took one breath, and walked back down the hall toward room 1907 with the strange calm of a woman who has already added up the cost and decided she'll pay it. She didn't go to the nurse's station. She didn't page Dr. Ferris. She walked straight past the two guards, who moved to stop her until something in her face made them hesitate, and she went to the side of the bed and put her hand gently on Hyun-woo's wrist, the way you do when you're about to tell someone something that's going to change everything. His eyes opened, tired, sharp, even through the exhaustion. "Mr. Do," she said quietly, "I need you to listen to me, and I need you to trust me, even though you have no reason to. The medication going into your arm right now is not the medication your chart says you've been given. Your numbers haven't been getting better. They've been getting worse, a little more every night, in a way that doesn't happen by accident. And the only person who's been allowed to change your treatment is a man your family flew in." She held his gaze. "I think someone is poisoning you. I think it's almost worked, and I am turning this off right now." She reached up and stopped the line. For one long moment, nobody in the room moved. The taller of the two guards had a hand inside his jacket. The shorter one was already at the door, scanning the hall. And Hyun-woo lay very still and looked at the small black nurse standing over him with her hand on his IV and her job, and her whole life balanced on the edge of a guess, and he did not look afraid. He looked, for the first time in longer than he could remember, like a man who had just been told the truth. He said something low and rapid in Korean. The shorter guard answered, already moving. And down the hall, before Dr. Ferris could finish whatever he was saying to the night administrator, two quiet men reached his side, and the smooth consultant's smile slipped completely off his face. He did not come back to the floor. He did not come back at all. Later, the hospital would call it a medication reconciliation error. Later, blood work would confirm everything Naomi had seen with her own two eyes. But in that moment, there was only the soft beep of a monitor that had finally, slowly begun to climb back towards something like life, and a dangerous man looking at the one person in the building who had walked toward him instead of away. "Why?" he asked her, when his voice came back. "You don't know me. People who know me are paid to keep me alive, and even they—" He stopped. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Naomi adjusted his blanket, the way she had 100 times that week. "Because somebody has to be the person who does the right thing, even when it's expensive," she said. "My mother made me promise." Something in his face came undone, just slightly, just for a second, and then folded itself carefully back up. But she'd seen it, and he knew she'd seen it. The trouble came at sunrise, the way it always does. Patricia Vaughan, the nursing director, was waiting at the station when Naomi clocked out, and she did not look like a woman about to say thank you. "You bypassed an attending physician. You shut off a treatment line on a VIP patient. You accused a credentialed consultant of attempted murder, on the floor, in front of staff." Vaughan pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Do you understand the kind of money and the kind of people attached to room 1907? Do you understand what it means that you were right? It is almost worse that you were right. She lowered her voice. You are the best nurse I have, Naomi. I want you to hear me say that, and I have administrators above me who have already decided you are a liability. There is going to be a review. I don't know if I can protect you. I know, Naomi said. Fawn blinked. You. I know. You might not be able to keep me. I understand. She held the woman's eyes, and underneath the fear and the procedure she saw something that might have been respect. I'd do it again. X. Her friend Rosa caught her at the lockers, eyes huge. Naomi, the whole floor is talking. They took a doctor out in handcuffs. People are saying you saved that man's life with your bare hands. What happened in there? I'm going home, Rosa. She hugged her quickly. The real kind of hug, the kind you give when you don't know what tomorrow holds. Then she picked up her bag and walked out into the grey New York morning, which received her the way the city always did, enormous, loud, completely indifferent to the fact that Naomi Adeyemi had probably just ended the only career that kept her brother fed. She stood on the sidewalk outside Hartwell and let herself feel all of it for the first time, the fear, the exhaustion, the dread of going home to tell Caleb she might have made everything worse. And then, underneath all of it, stubborn and irrational and impossible to argue away, something that felt almost like peace. She had told the truth. Whatever it cost, she had told the truth. She didn't notice the black car until it slowed beside her at the corner. Her whole body went tight. After what she'd just seen, she knew exactly what kind of people had reasons to be unhappy with her this morning, and none of them were the kind you reasoned with. She kept walking. The car kept pace. And then the back window came down, and it wasn't a stranger looking out at her. It was Ji-ho, the shorter of the two guards, the quiet one. He didn't smile, exactly, but his eyes were not the eyes of a threat. Miss Adeyemi, he said. Mr. Du would like to know that you got home safely. There are people this morning who would prefer you hadn't been in that room. We would prefer that nothing happens to you. A pause. With your permission, we'll see you to your door. Only that. Her phone rang before she could answer. Unknown number. She looked at it for 3 full seconds, then picked up. Miss Adeyemi. The voice was quiet, Korean accented, steadier than a man one night removed from his own near murder had any right to sound. Are you safe? She exhaled slowly. I think that depends on you. It does not, Hyun-woo said. Not anymore. The man who arranged what happened to me is someone I trusted with my life. His name is Nam Gi-chul. He has been my right hand for 19 years, and he decided that the family is worth more without me in it. A pause, and for the first time something raw moved under the calm. He knows your name now. He knows you stopped him. I will not allow what he tried to do to me to find its way to your door. Another pause. Let my people take you home, please. That last word landed differently than everything before it, like it had cost him something, like it was not a word he used, and he knew it, and he wanted her to know it too. Okay, she said softly, only to the door. He was quiet for a moment. There is a place in Flushing, he said then, a tea house called Dalbit. You will not find it on any map. When the review is over, and it will be over, I promise you that I would like you to come. There are things I would rather say to your face than to a phone. A beat, if you'll allow it. I'll think about it, she said, because she didn't trust the thing happening in her chest, and she hung up, before he could hear it, in her voice. The car followed her home and stopped where she told it to, 2 doors down so the neighbours wouldn't see. And when she came up the stairs, Caleb was awake at the kitchen table, and he took one look at her face and said, What happened? The way only a kid who has already lost one parent learns to ask it. She made them both tea and told him everything. He listened the way their mother used to, without interrupting, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long while. Are we going to be okay? He asked finally. I don't know yet, she said. She had promised herself a long time ago that she would never lie to him about the things that mattered. Caleb turned his cup slowly in his hands. Then he looked up at her, and he had their mother's exact eyes when he did it. You saved a man's life last night, he said. Whatever happens, I just want you to know I think she'd be proud of you. A pause. I think she'd say you did the expensive thing. Naomi had to look out the window for a minute so her little brother wouldn't see her cry. The review took 11 days. Naomi spent every one of them braced for the worst, and then, on the 12th morning, Patricia Vaughan called her into the office, sat down across from her, and said, with something that was almost wonder in her voice, "I don't know who you know. The complaint has been withdrawn. The consultant's credentials were forged. There's a commendation going in your file instead of a reprimand. And frankly, Naomi, the language in it reads like it was written by someone with a great deal of money and a great deal of gratitude." She slid a single cream-coloured envelope across the desk. "This came for you, by hand." The man who delivered it would not give a name. Naomi opened it that night, alone, at the kitchen table, after Caleb had gone to bed. Inside was an address in Flushing, a time, and 3 handwritten words in English. "When you're ready." Dalbit did not exist on Google Maps. She checked twice. It was tucked behind an unmarked door on a quiet street, and when she finally worked up the courage to go, the door opened before she knocked, and Jiho stood aside without a word, and led her down a narrow hall that smelled of barley tea and something sweet and warm into a room that stopped her completely. It was beautiful, not the cold, glittering beauty of the hospital's private wing, all glass and money and distance. This was something quieter, low light from paper lanterns, dark wood, a single low table set with 2 cups already poured, and a small dish of food she didn't recognize, and on the walls, soft ink paintings of mountains disappearing into mist. The kind of room that tells you, without a single word, that whoever sits here values things that money cannot buy in a hurry. Hyun-woo was already there. He stood when she came in, and that undid her more than anything else could have, a man like him rising to his feet for a night nurse from the Bronx. He looked different here than he had in the hospital bed. Stronger, steadier. But the careful armor he wore in front of the world was set down, just slightly, the way a man sets down something heavy when he's decided he can finally trust the floor beneath him. "You came," he said. "You asked," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I ask many people many things. They do not always come." "I'm not many people," she said. And this time the almost smile got all the way to the real thing before he could stop it. He waited until she had sat, before he sat down himself. "I have spent my whole life," he said slowly, "surrounded by people who keep me alive because it pays them to. Doctors, lawyers, men with guns standing at every door I've ever walked through." He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. "And one night, a woman who had every reason in the world to walk away put her hand on my arm and risked everything she loved for a stranger she was afraid of. Do you understand how rare that is? I have built an empire and never once seen it." He looked up at her. "I find I cannot stop thinking about it." Naomi wrapped both hands around the warmth of her tea. "I didn't do it to be seen," she said. "I did it because my mother made me promise, and because you didn't deserve to die alone in a room full of people pretending not to notice." "I know," he said. "That is exactly why I can't stop thinking about it." He told her then, quietly, what he had brought her there to say. That Namgi-chul had been removed, she didn't ask how, and he didn't offer. That her brother's school was paid through graduation, and the debt with her mother's name on it had been settled, and that none of it carried a single string. "You saved my life," he said. "There is no version of the world where I let yours stay hard." And that he wanted, if she would have it, to bring her into his household as the family's private physician, fully legitimate, fully documented, paid more than she had ever made, and completely walled off from the part of his world that lived in the dark. "You would care for people," he said. "Nothing more. You would never have to touch the rest of it. I keep it far from anyone. He stopped, started again. "Far from anyone who matters to me." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. The lanterns moved gently. Outside, Flushing went on with its evening, a whole bright city that knew nothing about the quiet thing taking shape in this room. "I know what you are, Mr. Du," she said carefully, not as an accusation, just the truth, laid on the table between them like a third cup nobody had poured. He didn't flinch. "Yes, some of your world is dangerous. Some of it is probably worse than dangerous." Some of it is mine, and some of it I am still trying to pull free of, and all of it I would keep 1,000 miles from you, he said. What I am offering you is none of it. It is honest work, honestly paid. And if you ever see something in my house that you believe is wrong, he held her gaze, I am counting on you to tell me to my face, the way you did when I was a stranger dying in a bed. I am not afraid of that. I have spent my whole life surrounded by people who were never brave enough to do it. She thought about Caleb, asleep over his homework, about a future she could suddenly see again. About 4 years of being invisible, of smiling at people who frightened her, of doing the right thing in rooms where no one ever thanked her. She thought about the way he had stood up when she walked in. It would have to be completely separate, she said slowly. Whatever else your world is, I don't see it, I don't know it, I don't touch it. I take care of people. That's all. Agreed. I keep my own hours when my brother needs me. Agreed. Always. And if I ever see something I believe is wrong, I will say so, directly to you, the same way I did the first night. Something changed in his face when she said it, deep and quiet, the way change is when it matters, like a man hearing the one thing he'd given up ever expecting to hear. Agreed, he said. And on that third agreement his voice was lower than it had been on the first two, like the word had come to mean something else entirely by the time he reached it. The room settled into a silence that wasn't uncomfortable at all, the kind that happens when two people have finally said something real and are letting it breathe. Then Jiho spoke from his place near the wall, the first words he'd offered all evening. The tea, he said gravely, is getting cold. Hyunwoo looked at him, Jiho looked at the ceiling. And Naomi, for the first time in longer than she could remember, longer than since before her mother got sick, laughed. Real and unguarded and startled right out of her, a sound so bright in that quiet room that it seemed to rearrange the air itself. Hyunwoo watched her laugh, and the look on his face in that moment, soft and unplanned and entirely undefended, was the most honest thing she had ever seen on it. He looked away first, reached for his tea. We should discuss your salary, he said, his voice ever so slightly different, and she was almost certain he knew that she'd noticed, and neither of them said a word about it. But the temperature in the room had changed. And outside in the flushing evening, New York went on, loud and layered and gloriously unbothered, while inside Dalbit, over cooling tea and careful words, something quietly and irreversibly began. 6 weeks later, Naomi Adeyemi moved through a sunlit house on the north shore of Long Island, the way she had once moved through a hospital floor, calm, watchful, gentle with everyone in her path. Different rooms, different patients, mostly elderly relatives, and a household staff who had never once in their lives been asked how they were feeling. Same hands, same voice, a completely different life. She loved the work, which surprised her. What surprised her more was everything around the edges of it, the small things, the things that had no business mattering as much as they did. The way he stood every single time she came into a room, without exception, like it was simply what a person did. The way he had learned, somewhere in those weeks, exactly how she took her tea strong, a little honey, the way her mother used to make it and never once mentioned it, just made sure it was there, waiting. Correct. The way he listened when she talked, not with the half attention of a busy man, but with his whole self, his complete focus, like every word out of her mouth was the most important thing in the room, because to him, somehow, it was. And the thing Jiho had let slip one afternoon, accidentally or not with Jiho, it was impossible to be sure that Mr. Do had quietly enrolled in an English literature course, the kind taught online late at night, because he had decided he wanted to be able to say certain things properly, and had grown tired of the gap between what he felt and what his second language would let him reach. She had not acknowledged that. She had filed it somewhere quiet and gone back to work. But it was there now. It was always there. One evening, after the house had gone still, he found her on the terrace looking out at the dark water, and he stood beside her without speaking for a while, the two of them, and the lights of the far shore, and the small sounds of the tide. You did well today, he said finally. He always said it. She had stopped being able to pretend it didn't reach her. I did my job. Yes. A pause. You always do. It is not as common as it should be. Then he turned and reached into his jacket and held out a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed, her name across the front in careful, deliberate handwriting. She looked at it, then at him. "What is this?" "Something I should have said weeks ago," he said, and could not find the words for in English. So I wrote it in mine. Her heart did something she refused to acknowledge. "You could have asked Jiho to translate." "No," he said simply. "I couldn't." She took the envelope. Their fingers didn't touch, and the small gap of air between their hands felt like something with weight to it. Inside was a single card. 4 words, in Korean. She read them slowly. Her lips moved, and even with only the edges of the language, the meaning assembled itself in her chest, like a held breath finally let go. 4 words. Her eyes closed. The water moved. Somewhere down the shore, a wind chime found a low, sweet note and let it go out over the dark. Naomi. The way he said her name, every single time, like it mattered which part of it carried the weight. I have been in every kind of dangerous room there is. Rooms with men who wanted me dead. Rooms where the wrong word ended everything. I lay in a hospital bed and watched the numbers on a machine count me down, and I was not afraid. He paused, and his voice dropped to something she had never heard from him. "I am more afraid right now than I have ever been in my life." She looked at the 4 words in her hand and felt the whole shape of the decision in front of her, what it would cost, what it would change, what it would ask her to step into with no guarantee of anything except that, whatever it was real. And it was real. She had spent 4 years learning the difference between what people performed and what was true. This was true. She folded the card slowly and held it against her, over her heart. "I'm going to go check on Caleb," she said softly. "He has an exam in the morning." A pause. "I know." And then she stopped. And she let the "and" then sit there, in the dark between them, open, unfinished a door, standing just barely ajar in the middle of a sentence. She went inside, and if there was something different in the way she walked, something lighter than there had been 6 weeks ago when she clocked out of Hartwell, certain she'd ruined her life, well, New York is full of stories. It always has been. This one was only getting started. And if you made it this far, you already know this one is far from over. Naomi has 4 Korean words pressed against her heart: a little brother with their mother's eyes, and a dangerous man who has never once in his life been afraid of anything until now. If you want part 2, where Naomi finally says the word back, where Caleb meets the man his sister works for, and where the people who wanted Hyunwoo dead come back to finish what they started, then smash that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think those 4 Korean words said. The sweetest guess gets pinned. Subscribe if you haven't already, because there's a brand new story every single week, and I'll see you in part 2.